If I want to try something out, this is totally fine, but it's a really bad idea to host something on such a system.
Today we're talking about WordPress hosting.
Yay.
What is the best hosting?
Get a computer, put it in your basement and open the ports for
everyone.
for everyone.
Okay,
no,
that's not.
Let's start with an overview, and then we can maybe go through some pros and cons, and maybe in the end we say what we would recommend for most people.
We've made a little list, right? Mm-hmm. Let's talk about those.
So basically, if you only host WordPress, you have come across dedicated WordPress hosting companies, right? There's WP Engine, or for German-speaking people, it's Rateboxes. And of course, there are a lot more. We're not affiliated with any of them. We just say the ones that come to our minds first, I guess. So the next thing are managed PHP hosting companies. And they are, you have All Inkle, Hetzner, Midwald, maybe for international ones, SiteGround. Then you have VPS or root server hostings. So where you actually get root access to a system, and the hoster just provides either a virtual machine or bare metal machine. The most known German one is probably Hetzner. And they also have a product called Hetzner Cloud nowadays. But then you also have AWS, Google Cloud, DigitalOcean, Azure, OVH. There are tons of companies that basically have server farms, right? And they offer you a way to get in, kind of. And then there is a newer type of hosting, which is a Docker-based or a Kubernetes hosting, where you basically just push a Docker file or some image. In terms of Kubernetes, it's a complex configuration that you can deploy to a cluster of servers. And then there are a couple of other types of hosting companies, and this basically started with Heroku back in the day, where you usually have something called build packs. So you just push a Git repository somewhere, and it will start bundling your application and provision servers for that. Heroku is there. There's also DigitalOcean app hosting and PHP Composer based applications, and there you have Pantheon, for example. And I'm sure we've missed some things and forgot something. So there's not an exhaustive list of everything you can do to host something, but these are basically the main categories, I would say, to host an application or host a WordPress application.
Yeah. And we want to talk about each of these options a little bit, the pros and cons from our perspective, from our experience, where we do have the experience, and then wrap up with a little recommendation or what we do for our projects and why we think that works well. So let's dive into it and start with the almost most obvious one, dedicated WordPress hosting.
Yeah. Dedicated WordPress hosting. This is basically, these are companies that have specialized in hosting WordPress, right? And for a typical WordPress blog or installation, you don't need to do any configuration most of the time. You just say you want a new installation, and then it gives you a well-configured, mostly well-configured, secure WordPress site. It takes care of auto updates. It lets you spin up multiple environments, maybe even for somebody who doesn't code or doesn't have a custom-made theme or plugin. It's also, you don't have to deal with getting things onto the server, because you can do everything through WP Admin, right? You can install themes, install plugins, and so on. And this is really, really simple to do. Yeah. For if you have your own code, there are multiple ways to integrate, usually either via SSH, via FTP, via Git. Maybe you can also tell it to check out code whenever you push somewhere, and so on. So there are quite a lot of options to do it, and it's probably the easiest thing to get up a running WordPress instance. But there are also cons, of course, because you usually pay based on one installation. Like for every installation, you pay a bit more. And then you have like different prices based on your page views that you have each month. Of course, there's also then like storage and like other things that are limited maybe. And the pricing can maybe sometimes be a bit intransparent, because what is a page view? And every hoster kind of counts it differently. Yeah, this is that's like one thing. And the other thing is you are not very flexible, right? Because you are limited to WordPress most of the time. Like you can sometimes choose your WordPress version, but sometimes also you cannot choose that, because they will just update it to the latest version. And you are also limited to a default WordPress installation most of the time. So whenever you want to do something composer-based or have like a different folder structure like Bedrock, you cannot deploy in many cases to these kind of hosters.
So it's very quick and easy to set up. It helps you with maintaining your site many times, like with additional features like managed auto updates and stuff like that, additional environments and so on. But yeah, it may be limited. So for whom do you think this works well, or for whom would you advise to use something like this, and for whom you don't?
So probably for people who have only one WordPress instance or one project that they use, and for people who don't have a lot of visitors yet, right? Because you can always scale quite easily with them as well. So you might start with like the cheapest plan they offer, and then you increase like the plan, the more visitors you get. And then usually the more visitors you get, the more money you make with your WordPress website, right? And then you can kind of justify the costs for that. Mm-hmm. For bigger projects or multiple projects, I would not usually recommend this. And like, again, it depends. If you have a partner like us, who takes care of things, right? Who maybe does some additional checks when you do updates, right? Because in these hosters, everything is automated, kind of. So you might get you might have the opportunity to delay certain updates, but usually you have to take care of everything. So also you have to be someone who wants to deal a bit with the hosting, right? So because they don't offer additional services usually based on like managing things. It's like an automated thing, and it's good if you know your way around. Maybe also if you are an agency or a freelancer who hosts a couple of smaller WordPress sites for their clients, that might also be a good starting point to say, okay, I'm using this. I'm selling the maybe even white labeling, selling these plans to my clients, and each client then pays like depending on the page views, the money for that.
So, but you said like it should be someone who does want to deal with hosting or does not want to deal with hosting.
Who doesn't necessarily want to deal with hosting, but who knows. Like who is a bit experienced and knows a bit like what hosting is mm-hmm. and what a server needs and so on, right?
Yeah. Yeah, right. I think like it's very easy to get started, and they provide, many of these hosting companies provide a lot of opinionated extra options, like providing an extra for an extra premium, like a web application firewall or specific caching plugins or strategies. And I think I'm also there, like a little bit in between. This is nice on one hand side for people who don't want to deal deeper with things and just want to trust the service and say, okay, activate it, pay $10 a month or whatever. But at the same time, you need to be as much into the topic that you need to at first like understand, that you understand and that you care about these kind of things. So it's kind of intermediate professionals, more like who are maybe not deeply technical, but still want to get like very great service and performance out of their sites and want to just like trust these opinionated choices.
Yeah. One thing to note, most of these hosting companies actually use Nginx as their web server. This is like also should be noted because the traditional way of hosting WordPress is more like Apache based, right? You can use the htaccess to do things and so on. But most of the dedicated WordPress hosting companies, they have decided to use Nginx also to make use of specific caching, like the fast CGI cache, I think it is, and have like integrated, like as you said, they have integrated the caching into the system, so you don't need like an additional caching plugin then probably, and there are a lot of decisions already made for you. And if you're fine with that and it works for your project, then it is a good option.
Yeah.
If you want to pay that price, the additional cost for that. Yeah.
Good. I say let's move on to the next one.
Yeah. The next one is managed PHP hosting. And like this is basically where in the, I want to say 90s, but I don't like in at least like 2000 and so on.
It feels like the 90s.
It feels like the 90s. Most things were hosted, right? Or let's put it that way. Most companies that come to us have usually like a contract with one of these big German hosting companies, like Strato Host Europe, Ionos, I don't know. Actually, Ionos is not that old, right? I just put them into the Strato bin for some reason, I know.
Well, because they are from originate from 1&1,
yeah.
right? Run 1. Yeah.
Exactly.
And they are old again.
But like we would recommend like companies like All Inkle, Hetzner, Mitwald, or SiteGround, for example. And the thing is, you are a lot more flexible, or a bit more flexible than with these dedicated WordPress hostings. You can host also as many sites as you want on a single shared account or on a dedicated account. This is something that is also quite important. Usually, like you have the web hosting packages that put you on a shared server where you share the resources of that system with other clients that you don't know. So whatever they do, if they have like long-running scripts on their in their packages, this might affect your page performance and so on, so your server performance at least. But there are also like dedicated plans where you have your own server. You don't get root access, but the hosting company takes care of everything, of configuring it, of managing it, of updating the system, of updating also the services running on this machine, and so on. And this is basically also a big advantage of, or like compared to like root hosting, which we talk about later, that you have a company that takes care of like system stuff for you, right?
Yeah.
It is less expensive than dedicated WordPress hosting, but it's more expensive than just having a root server. But it's also a little bit difficult to know what you get when you sign up for such a contract. A lot of these companies have like their custom-made management UIs, right? So you usually like have a web interface that you log into where you can say, okay, I want to create a new vhost or like a new domain or subdomain or whatever. Then you point it to a directory on the disk of your server and so on. And this is a lot of the times done with custom-made software. And then, of course, it depends on how was this, like, what kind of priorities did the company set? Like, what did they want to achieve? Is it possible to create multiple accounts, have isolated PHP processes, and have like a high level of security? Or is it just like for, I don't know, single installations may be optimized for that. And of course, do you trust the company to have good security settings, to take care of updates and so on? What is the automated process? If they don't use custom management, they usually use tools like cPanel or Plesk or like other things that are out there. And then you just have to hope that they update these regularly. And yeah. And
you talked about flexibility. In what sense do you consider these to be more flexible?
Well, you are not limited to WordPress. That's number one. You're not limited to any folder structure. Like you basically can host any usually like any PHP application that you want. And in like depending on your hoster again, and this is probably not possible in the shared accounts, but if you have a dedicated account, a dedicated server, you can a lot of the times also ask them to install additional software for you, right?
Yeah.
So let's say you need Redis, or you need an Elasticsearch, or need like some other service running on your machine. They can most likely do that for usually like time-based premium, right?
Yeah, right. Depending on what type of hoster you choose, the biggest, largest names, at least in Germany, to my experience, they're not that flexible, but rather very rigid in terms of, hey, this is what you get, and you get your backend interface, you can configure everything, but that's it. And we're setting the rules for that. That's what we've not made that many great experiences with, but with more specific and service-oriented hosters like All Inkle, for example, which is our favorite hoster in Germany. They are very flexible, and they also provide great support. I think also the level of support changes with the different types of hostings, what you get, what you can expect. I would expect that with the dedicated WordPress hosting, you can expect to get more like application level support, maybe more to that end. In terms of managed PHP hosting, you get more like infrastructure, IT infrastructure support, and getting like a managed system with them providing everything. And in terms of root server and VPS, we're going to dig into that in a minute.
Yeah.
So for whom is managed PHP hosting? For whom is it not? What would you say?
I would say it's for everyone who has a lot of PHP applications or a lot of WordPress applications, and who doesn't want to deal with the complexity of securing a system and configuring all the services that are running, right? So again, you said that before, there are differences, and maybe we should have split this a bit more, because managed PHP hosting, there's like these contracts or these offers where you don't have managed PHP hosted, but you have like out of the box PHP hosting, right? So it's like, it's one system and there's nothing, like you cannot change anything. If you have like additional software you want to run, you can't do that. And then the managed PHP hosting, it's actually where there is like a company with like service technicians that you can call, and yes, you might need to pay for that extra, but then you usually have like, it's with All Inkle and also with Hetzner, for example, they are charging by 15 minutes. Like whenever you take 15 minutes of their time, they charge this in addition. So you can say, okay, could you please install this? Could you please do that? Or you can say, hey, I get a lot of connections to my database because of the setup, and I have enough system resources. Could you please change the configuration so that I allow more than 500 simultaneous connections to MySQL or MariaDB, right? And like this is the hosting that we talk about when we talk about managed PHP hosting. And this is for all like professionals, let's say, that again don't want to deal with the system level stuff, but want to have a bit more flexibility and like want to also maybe offer like custom solutions to their clients for hosting specific things. Yeah.
Yeah, and you might have very specific ideas about the infrastructure, but you don't want to maintain it, right? Just tell someone, do it like that, please take care of that, but I don't want to maintain it. And that's leading us to VPS, root server hosting.
Mm. That's probably the most popular one because it's so cheap. Like you can get for €2.20 or whatever, you can get like a server in the cloud that is spun up in seconds that you can do on whatever you want, right? Because let's face it, also with these, like the managed PHP hosting, for example, only very few of them allow, for example, Node.js hosting or some other, like Ruby, Python, Go, whatever. Like it's they don't necessarily allow it. Again, you can do that if you want, and if you talk to them, usually you can do that. But on a root server, you can do whatever you want, and this is awesome, right? Like you are free to do whatever you want, and I always think like if I want to try something out and if I want to experience with things, this is totally fine, and you can do it. But I think it's a really bad idea to host something on such a system when you don't, or when you are not a full-time operations person that knows how to keep a system safe and how to deal with vulnerabilities, do like ongoing constant updates and so on, and improve the configuration and whatnot. So the greatest strength of this type of hosting is also its biggest weakness, right?
Right. So the greatest strength of being very flexible, you can do anything you want, install any kind of software, sometimes even system, like what kind of core system server you want to have running and so on. But yeah, you need to maintain that. And so yeah, this can be very great. I think there's not a lot to say about that beyond that point. You get everything that you want. It's affordable, but yeah, you have to take care of it, and we don't want to take care of that. And we like to leave that to other people who want to take care of that and are professionals in that area.
Yeah.
But yeah, we also, that doesn't say like we don't have that or we don't use that, right? We also have a root server ourselves, right? What do you use that for?
For example, one is used for our testing or for our support projects, actually, where we do local development in our support environment. Because this server is completely like shut off from the outside. You can only or you could connect with a VPN or with other ways of authenticating to it. But we basically block as much as we can and take care of updates, yes. But I would also say we don't do like the latest, like not everything is always patched to the latest level. There might be a couple of days or weeks delay in that, right? And that's the thing with a live running production site. You don't want to have that. You want everything to be up to date and everything patched and everything well configured and so on. There's one thing or like a type of services that have popped up throughout the last couple of years that help you actually manage root servers, right? Because with a root server, you usually get the most like bang for the buck, right? You pay very little money and you get pretty good performance or pretty good specs. So these services, like there have been like tools like cPanel and Plesk have been around for quite some time, and you can always install that on your machine, right? But then again, you have to take care of still like managing Plesk, or cPanel, although there are like, of course, tools inside these programs that help you also update servers and so on. It's still some manual. There are still some manual things you need to do. But especially for WordPress, there's like SpinUp WP. There's also for like Laravel stuff, there's Laravel Forge. And there are a lot of like other services like Ploy, RunCloud, Cleaver, that where you basically pay a monthly fee and you can add servers. You need to add your root credentials, or like at least have the SSH key from this like management tool access or authorized to access your server and as a root user, and then it will like do everything for you, right? Install the right packages, keep it up to date. You will get a nice web UI where you can see if all the servers are up to date, if everything is configured correctly, and so on. And this is a pretty affordable way to manage multiple of these servers if you are a freelancer or an agency that actually has somebody dedicated to that can take care of it, and you want to do that. This might be a good option, but again, you rely on another like third-party software, on another company that might have access. Like if that gets compromised, they have sort of root access to all of your servers and so on. So yeah, for us, we say we'd rather put the servers in the hands of experts who know what they are doing and who will support us, because that is another thing. You usually don't really get support from these kind of services, right?
Yeah, that's what I wanted to address as well. Like the service level, what do you expect in terms of service level when you are renting a root server?
Well, usually you don't really have any, like only if like my hard disk is broken, or the RAM isn't working anymore. But usually a good hoster will monitor this anyways, and they will tell you when that's the case, right? So they monitor hardware, but they won't monitor anything else. Like, and they also won't be able to help you if you have a question. Yeah, my WordPress installation is not working.
Right. Exactly. So, and there is like this system of like where you see like WordPress, dedicated WordPress hosting. It's more like, so you can expect support more like towards the application layer, managed PHP hosting more regards to the system layer, architecture, how the server is set up and what kind of dependency are running and so on that server. And with root server, yeah, rather on the hardware, and if at all, but close to zero, I guess. Then, what else did we not talk about?
Docker, Kubernetes, and the other.
Yeah, let's move on with that.
Yeah. So Docker and Kubernetes has also experienced a high increase in users, probably. The pros are like the scalability, the flexibility. Also, it's not that expensive because you usually, in these big cloud providers, you don't pay for the service. In addition, you only pay for the computing power that you use. And since it's so scalable, you can like shut it down to a minimum instance. And once you have traffic, you just scale it up automatically and so on. And this sounds always like really great, but it is a different mindset. Like things work differently, like totally different than normal hosting, like traditional hosting. And it's also quite complicated to set up usually. And again, there was like this increase in using Docker for like production stuff for a while. I think it has slowed down a little bit, but I always was really skeptical about it because in the end, you as a software developer or like an application developer are now need to take care of installing services and configuring like processes that you wouldn't have done before, right? Because the hoster then only says, yeah, just give me a Docker image and or a Docker file and I will build the image. But on how you create that, how you configure it, and that there might be vulnerabilities, and also that you, even in a Docker container, you have to update a PHP version from time to time. That means rebuilding without cache and having like the correct settings just in the Docker file. While these are all things that are that are doable, right? Nothing is impossible. But the question is, do you really want to spend your time becoming an expert in that, or do you just want to hand it off to somebody else, right?
Yeah.
Rather spend time developing an app.
A Docker container is configured usually via some kind of configuration file, in which you define what system is running, what services are installed, and so on, all the dependencies, so on. So how does it compare then to a root server, where you can also do like kind of anything you want, like in a Docker container you can also do and install anything you want, right?
Yeah.
How's it different?
Well, it's a bit what I said. It's like totally different. That's why. So the thing is, you cannot save anything in like once a container is running. You have this what is called an ephemeral file system, right? So everything any file change that you make will be lost when you restart the container, for example. So also when you scale, right? But this is the thing, like it's not so easy to scale a WordPress instance on a normal server because everything is in a file system and so on and whatnot. And in Docker or Kubernetes-based setups, you have to think about these things before, and you have to find solutions because it doesn't work any other way. But then once you've done it, you are able to scale your application as horizontally as large as possible. And this means you cannot like save uploads to your Docker container. You need like an external storage. Usually an S3 compatible storage is used for that, or you use like a distributed file system like Ceph. Or like other things, but now we're getting really into details, right? Then changes that plugins make to, for example, the htaccess or to other files. These are lost once you restart or like scale up and scale down. Also, this is of course not synced to like between the instances. So you have to take this into account, and there are a couple of Kubernetes configurations or whatever for WordPress and so on. And while you can do that, it's like you have to get in pretty deep in order to get this working well. Yeah.
Because like a container is more like a little brain, I'd say. Like it's the processing power, right? Where you can do stuff. And which like little small brains or satellites with processing power. Yeah, but and this is so cool because you can also configure that these systems should automatically scale depending on the processing power that is needed, right? And then kind of the visits and the page load. So yeah, in theory and in practice, this is really cool if you have it configured. But just like getting there can be so complicated. So for high traffic sites, right? And single platforms, which really need all the scalability and cloud and so on, this can be extremely powerful. Yeah. But you got to be sure that it's worth your money, time, and effort. Huh?
Yeah, exactly. So this has to be like, this is actually for people or for teams. I would go as far as to say this is for teams that are taking care of really high traffic websites. And where you have a lot of like, I don't know, maybe also different services. Maybe you need like I don't know, a search server like Elasticsearch. You need you have Redis for multiple things. You have maybe some other services, and you just build your entire infrastructure based on that. And then it would, and the knowledge is already kind of there, like, you know, because maybe you use that for your internal product as well. Then it does make sense.
Okay.
Yeah.
What kind of levels of support do you expect?
Only like if some Kubernetes specific things break, right? So, but not a lot usually.
Yeah, it's more about the infrastructure. You get the infrastructure, and then you manage all of that yourself. Oh, you meant only for probably really high traffic websites. What is really high traffic for you? Just like to set some ground. Are we talking about 10,000, 100,000, a million page views a month?
It's more about like a peak, also like a peak performance, right? And if things are dynamic, because even like static sites, we haven't really talked about also like things like Cloudflare or CDN caching or like other like static or we have talked about right, the static caching before. So with Cloudflare and like a rather static site and Cloudflare configured properly, there's no limit in serving any number of requests, right? So because everything is static and you can use the entire infrastructure from Cloudflare for that. But for like more dynamic, for like big shops or other like more dynamic, high traffic websites that maybe also like have TV commercials going on. So it's a lot of concurrent visitors, right? I don't know. I don't want to say a number because I'm not really sure, but thousands of concurrent visitors. Let's put it that way.
Okay, that's a lot.
Yeah.
What else?
Yeah, let's just go to the other platforms like Heroku, DigitalOcean, App Hosting, Pantheon, and so on. This is like a nice middle ground. So
how does it work? What is that actually?
You usually have like a config file in your source code, and this tells the project what to build or what to serve actually as well, right? So for example, if you have a Composer PHP file, it might know immediately, okay, I just run Composer install or like Composer build or whatever. If you have a Node project, you have a package JSON, it knows, okay, I will run npm install and run npm run build. And then I will, maybe there's a public folder in it. Like usually they analyze your folder structure and it will then take like the dist folder or the public folder and just serve that in like a Docker kind of way, right? With like an instance that is just spun up for your application kind of. And there are a lot of like conventions that are built in, but usually also quite a lot of configurability. Where you then can have like an additional config file where you say, yeah, I want to have these couple of redirects. I want to have specific routes. I want to have like mount certain projects in certain sub routes of my application and so on. So it is quite flexible, but you always have to like learn a little bit the config of the specific hoster and also like the features of the specific hoster, and then you get quite a flexible, most of the time also like scalable hosting. So similar to Docker Kubernetes, but with a little more ease because it's usually not as complicated as configuring like a Kubernetes cluster.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why is that? Because it's more like specific to Composer configuration, for example, specific build processes.
Yeah, well, you don't have as many options. Like you don't have as much freedom as with Kubernetes. Like But I think like these kind of builds and hostings options were there before Kubernetes even existed, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's basically different hosters came up, especially Heroku, with like these build packs that are used by a couple of other hosters as well, where you have some conventions or also a couple of config functionality. And then based on that, there were a couple of iterations. So to make it even more flexible but the more flexible you make it, the more complicated you make it. So in the end, you had like Kubernetes and maybe I'm totally wrong. Like, I don't know about the history of it, but I just like this was my
understanding
or experience. Yeah.
Little pros and cons for that.
Pros, it's an easier way to get a scalable infrastructure, but also cons, it is more work and it is a bit of a mind shift as well. Like it's this whole not being able to SSH into your environment, change something and have it persisted, but like this kind of things. And it's like it might differ from hoster to hoster what the options are and how you configure it. Yeah.
Right, that might differ a lot, but I just heard in a podcast episode about Pantheon that they also provide this option that you can mount like single branches of your project and it's integrated with Git and everything and so on. So it kind of like gives you all the whole team development set up and but this is very specific probably to them and might be totally different with other types of hosters in that same category. So yeah, if you find a hoster in that category that fulfills very much your needs, this can be very powerful, right, for you. And what kind of level of service do you expect there then?
Well, it depends again. Like the basic support will probably be more like language specific. Also, like maybe like PHP specific or Node specific and so on. But a lot of the companies that offer something like that also have like additional like support plans where you then pay extra to get like even. Well, I know like for Pantheon and also like WP Engine and so on, they have like dedicated support teams, right? So you might get a dedicated person handling like you, but of course this only makes sense if you pay them quite a bit.
Yeah.
if you
but you might get like very specific support, right? For if you have a very specific type of solution that you're using. Okay, great. Whew.
I think that's enough, right?
that's enough. It's a lot to digest, a lot to go into. But this was meant to be, from our side, like a quick overview of what kind of categories we see in the space, what kind of categories we have tried ourselves and experienced with. What are our recommendations? What did we end up with in the first place? And what would you recommend for others who are in the same category as us?
Yeah, so like we decided to go with managed PHP hosting, right? Or with managed hosting. Let's put it that way. So we decided for a hoster that offers a lot of like best practices, like really good server configuration, really good security, like having the ability to create sub accounts that are completely isolated on the same machine and so on. So yeah, and that's all Inkle, as you've said before. And I would actually like for any mid-sized company hosting a lot of like WordPress projects, I would actually recommend the same. Only like when you are above a certain size, the larger you get, when you can actually afford to hire, and not only afford because you have to find those people, right? So when you can, but when you can afford to pay dedicated infrastructure people or operations people, then a root server, of course, might end up being cheaper and more flexible solution, maybe. But yeah, for everything mid-size, I would definitely recommend this managed hosting. Also for people or companies who want really good service, who want to have experts, who want to be like safe or secure, want to have a good feeling about hosting their websites, I would always recommend dedicated managed hosting. Like, and check your the hoster if they offer like making adjustments to the default, right? I've just recently gone through like the specs of a hoster where I saw, okay, we are our MySQL version that we offer for managed hosting is MySQL 5.5, right? Now try to see when this had the end of life. So it's already like, I don't know, 7 years end of life, and they're still using this. So things like that I would actually make me a little bit suspicious. So yeah, look for someone who has some flexibility. Ask a couple of questions and then do that. For people who don't want to deal with that at all, well, if not at all, go and find yourself an agency or a freelancer who will take care of it. But for a little bit tech savvy people who know a little bit about the web and think they can handle setting up hosting themselves, I would definitely recommend these dedicated WordPress hosting companies, as you usually pay as much, like, or pay more for more visited sites. So this also makes sense if you have like really default setups and only use like default themes and so on.
Yeah, right. But rather not for custom themes, not according to our experience, or especially when you're collaborating with an agency, because I can see also how you might, if it's your own website, you might have a question. It's like, hey, can I activate this option in WP Engine about this caching system and application firewall? And then our answer probably is, I don't know, because I don't know all their details, what exactly they are offering. So then it's more up to you typically to learn about these things and to manage them and see if they work. But if you want an agency like us to take care of things, it's actually easier for us to go with our recommendations and best practices and not having to deal with these very specific things. So again, it depends, as you said, it depends on the type of project and website and so on. But for us, there's an agency and it's like an all-round best practice solution for most of our clients also. Managed PHP hosting is really great. That said, we're curious, what types of WordPress hosting are you using and do you prefer? And you might have very different opinions about these things than us. Let us know in the comments below.